I think he'll change. He is committed of his own level of service, and
privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty.
Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen.
State banquets.
The moment began in a corridor where whispers were usually swallowed by protocol, but this time, nothing could contain what happened. Queen Camilla confronted Princess Anne in front of Windsor staff after Anne refused to support Camilla's demand for greater influence over private palace decisions. Charles witnessed the exchange, lost control, and the mask of calm monarchy cracked in a way no one present could forget. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not choose that corridor by accident. She knew Windsor Castle carried its own kind of power, because it was not only a royal residence, but one of the monarchy's most symbolic homes, a place where private family tension could become institutional crisis, the moment staff began to hear it. For days, she had felt pushed aside in conversations about private palace decisions, meaning the quiet choices made behind closed doors about household access, family roles, schedules, and influence. Anne had been close to those decisions because Charles trusted her judgment, and that trust cut deeper than any public insult could have done. Anne saw the danger before Camilla spoke the first sharp word. She understood that this was no longer only about consultation, it was about control. The Princess Royal, a title given to the monarch's eldest daughter as a mark of senior royal status, had spent her life treating duty as something colder and stronger than comfort. Camilla wanted recognition in a room where her position should have carried weight. Anne wanted limits before emotion became policy. Their eyes held for a moment, and the staff nearby seemed to understand that no ordinary disagreement was unfolding. Charles stepped into the tension, already wounded. He looked from his wife to his sister, and the choice in front of him felt cruel. Camilla's face had hardened with humiliation because Anne had refused to bend where others could hear it. Anne remained controlled, almost painfully still, and that calm made the queen consort's anger feel even more exposed. The king wanted silence, but silence had already failed him. He wanted loyalty, but loyalty had split into two different meanings right in front of him. Then control broke. Charles slammed his hand against a side table, and a silver pen rolled across the polished surface before dropping toward the floor. The sound was small, but the meaning was enormous. One staff member froze near the service doorway, too startled to move, while Camilla stared at the king as if even she had not expected his anger to rise so fast. Anne did not flinch. She simply told Camilla that loyalty to the crown did not mean surrendering judgment, and those words struck harder than any shout. That was the true fracture. Camilla had forced the confrontation into the open, Anne had refused to surrender, and Charles had revealed the fear beneath his anger, that authority was slipping inside his own home. But this moment had not been born in that corridor. It had been triggered days earlier by one private wound Camilla never forgave, and to understand why she chose that audience, that timing, and that dangerous line, the story must move into the pride that made the explosion inevitable. This was not simply a quarrel between royal women. It was a collision between three different versions of loyalty: Charles's need for order, Camilla's demand for recognition, and Anne's refusal to bend when she believed the monarchy itself was being weakened. In that triangle, affection became strategy, silence became judgment, and every carefully chosen word carried the weight of decades. Charles had depended on Anne for the kind of truth few people dared to give him. She did not flatter him when he was uncertain. She did not soften her warnings when the palace felt fragile. That mattered because the monarchy, the ancient system where a king or queen stands as the living symbol of national continuity, survives on discipline as much as affection. The king knew his sister represented that discipline. He trusted her blunt counsel because she had never treated duty as performance. Camilla saw that trust, and every quiet conversation between brother and sister felt like a locked door closing in her face. Camilla carried a different wound. She was not fighting only for power. She was fighting against the feeling of being present yet excluded. She had become the queen consort, meaning the wife of the king who supports his reign without holding the same ruling authority. But inside the private rooms of Windsor, that title did not always bring the influence she expected. Anne could enter a conversation with a single raised eyebrow and change its direction. The queen could sit beside Charles at the table and still feel she was waiting for permission to be heard. That imbalance became unbearable. Charles felt the pressure tighten around him long before the corridor clash. One evening, he read a household note alone and lowered it slowly when he realized Camilla had demanded a meeting with Anne without his approval. The note was brief, but the meaning was brutal. His wife was no longer asking him to mediate, she was moving around him. His sister, meanwhile, had already warned one senior aide during a documented private briefing that forcing influence through confrontation would expose weakness, not strength. Anne understood the danger. Camilla felt the insult. Charles stood between them, and the space between loyalty and humiliation became dangerously thin. Anne did not hate Camilla, and that made the conflict sharper. She simply believed the Queen was pushing emotion into places where judgment had to remain cold. Camilla did not fear Anne's anger. She feared her calm, because that calm made every demand look smaller. Charles wanted both women to step back, yet each woman believed stepping back would mean surrender. The palace could survive public storms, cruel headlines, and whispered criticism. But this was different. This was private pride, turning into royal pressure. The confrontation at Windsor was shocking, but the real wound began before anyone raised their voice, during a polished royal occasion that turned into Camilla's private point of no return. Every palace crisis has a moment that looks harmless from the outside and dangerous from within. For Camilla, that moment came during a Windsor charity reception when Anne quietly stepped forward, redirected a senior patron away from Camilla, and took control of a conversation about royal household priorities. To guests, it looked like efficiency. To Camilla, it felt like public correction. Camilla held her smile because the room demanded it, but inside, something hard shifted. The Windsor charity reception, a formal gathering where royal guests support causes, mattered because it was supposed to show unity, not expose who carried real influence. Anne had interrupted a discussion about patronage coordination, which means deciding which charities receive royal attention and which family members represent them. The senior patron had been listening to the Queen, then turned toward the Princess Royal as if the true authority had spoken. Camilla felt the correction land in public. Anne believed she had stopped confusion before it became policy. Anne did not raise her voice, and that made the moment more damaging. She guided the senior patron back toward Charles's household advisors, and the gesture told everyone that old channels still mattered more than new demands. The Queen tightened her hand around the stem of her glass while humiliation burned beneath the surface. If Anne could redirect one conversation without challenge, then every future conversation could be redirected the same way. Camilla would remain beside the king in ceremony, yet outside the private machinery that shaped his choices. Charles sensed the change before the reception ended. He saw Camilla grow quieter, and he saw Anne remain calm, convinced she had done nothing cruel. The king understood both women too well. Camilla wanted proof that her place carried private weight. Anne wanted proof that his household would not bend every time emotion pressed against procedure. Windsor was not only a home, it was where family feeling and royal order met, and when those forces collided, the crown felt unstable. Later that evening, Camilla stood near a closed drawing room door and heard Charles and Anne speaking inside without her. The drawing room, a private sitting room used for close family or trusted conversations, became a symbol of everything she feared. Charles was behind that door with his sister. Anne was inside the space Camilla wanted to enter. When the door opened, the Princess Royal passed with a composed nod, and the Queen understood the argument had already happened without her. That was when she stopped waiting. By the time Camilla reached Anne at Windsor, she was not asking for respect anymore. She was demanding it where silence had always protected the monarchy. The confrontation did not happen behind velvet doors. It happened where staff carried trays, opened doors, and pretended not to hear the private language of power. Camilla stopped Anne near the Windsor corridor and spoke with a sharpness that made the air change. Anne did not retreat. Charles entered moments later, and what should have been contained became impossible to hide. Camilla moved first because waiting had begun to feel like surrender. Anne had just left a short household briefing, the kind of private meeting where senior aides discuss schedules, family duties, and sensitive internal choices before they become public trouble. That mattered because those briefings shaped access to the king, and access meant influence. The Queen knew Anne had been present where she had not. She knew her sister-in-law had heard what she had only been told later. So when she intercepted her near the corridor used by senior staff, privacy vanished before the first accusation landed. Anne heard the anger beneath every word, but she refused to give it the reaction Camilla wanted. The Queen challenged her over the Windsor charity reception and the private advisory conversations that followed, accusing her of undermining Charles's wife in front of the household. The Princess Royal kept her voice low. That title, given to the monarch's eldest daughter, carries no ruling power, but it carries weight because it signals senior duty and lifelong service. Anne used that weight without raising her tone. She made clear that she would not apologize for protecting structure, and Camilla's wounded pride began turning into fury. Charles arrived at the worst possible second. Camilla had just said Anne behaved as if she were the only woman in the family trusted to guard the crown, and the line froze the corridor. The crown, meaning the monarchy itself and the authority it represents, was not a word used lightly inside Windsor. Charles understood the danger immediately. His wife was no longer only defending herself. She was accusing his sister of controlling the moral center of his reign. Anne looked at him, then back at the Queen, and the silence became unbearable. Charles lost control when Anne answered that trust was earned through restraint, not demanded through position. The words struck him because they were aimed at Camilla but landed on him too. His voice rose so sharply that staff lowered their heads, and the king seemed to realize too late that the room had already changed. Camilla stood wounded and exposed. Anne stood steady and unbending. Charles stood between them, no longer a calm ruler, but a man watching his private loyalties turn into public damage. That was the true danger. The shouting would fade, the staff would be told to forget. But no one inside Windsor could unhear the question that followed. If Camilla demanded authority, Anne defended restraint, and Charles broke under the pressure, who truly held power inside the king's court? Once his anger had echoed through Windsor, the palace could no longer pretend this was personal irritation. It had become a struggle over authority itself. Anne did not need a title to control the room. She had something more dangerous inside royal walls: credibility. Charles trusted her because she told him what others softened. Staff respected her because she worked without spectacle. Camilla understood this, and that understanding turned resentment into fear. The confrontation had exposed one brutal truth. Anne's influence did not require permission. Anne had built that power through years of service, consistency, and discipline. No one could easily dismiss. Her role mattered because the monarchy, the system where the royal family represents national continuity, depends on public duty and private restraint working together. She carried both. Charles relied on her during moments of strain because she gave judgment without performance. The king knew his sister would risk his anger if the institution needed honesty, and that made her central, though she held no formal command over Camilla. Camilla sat afterward in a private room, shaken by the memory of staff watching Anne remain composed while Charles broke first. The queen consort understood what that contrast had done. Her own pain had been loud. Anne's strength had been quiet. Charles had defended his wife, but the defense had cost him. The king felt exposed, not because he had chosen Camilla in that instant, but because his anger made him look less controlled than the sister he had tried to challenge. A senior courtier moved quickly once the corridor emptied. He removed the corridor rota from circulation, a small act that mattered, because a rota is the staff schedule showing who was assigned where and when. If that page disappeared from access, the palace was not simply organizing work, it was managing witnesses. Charles understood the meaning when he heard it. Camilla understood it too. The incident was no longer emotional damage. It had become something the household machinery needed to contain. Anne received a sealed note from Charles later that day, asking for a private conversation. She held it unopened for several minutes, then placed it beside her gloves, as if the paper itself carried too much heat. The note mattered because it showed the king now needed his sister, not to apologize publicly, but to help pull the palace back from fracture. Anne did not rush to answer. She knew Camilla would read that delay as another insult, and that was why the silence felt so heavy. The machinery of control had begun moving, but the emotional damage inside the family was spreading faster than any palace instruction. As staff were told to forget what they had heard, Camilla and Charles were forced to face the immediate consequences of a confrontation that could not be unseen. The palace did what it always does after impact. It lowered its voice. Doors closed. Schedules shifted. Staff were reminded of discretion. But the silence felt different this time because everyone knew the damage had not come from rumor or outside pressure. It had come from within, from a wife confronting a sister, and from a king losing command of himself before witnesses. Camilla felt the new reality settle the moment the door closed behind her. She sat alone, removing one glove slowly, replaying Anne's words as if each sentence had left a mark. The household staff, the workers who handled daily service, access, rooms, meals, and movement inside a royal residence, were reassigned from the corridor area. That mattered because staff do not simply see rooms, they see patterns, moods, absences, and cracks. If they had watched Charles lose control, then the damage was no longer private emotion. It had entered the memory of Windsor. Charles paced in his study with anger moving in two directions. He blamed Camilla for forcing a confrontation where restraint should have ruled, yet he blamed himself for becoming the spectacle. His team moved fast to protect stability, because the image of a calm monarch matters when the monarchy depends on confidence as much as ceremony. A palace instruction quietly discouraged conversation about the incident, not because words could undo what happened, but because repeated words could turn a family rupture into legend. The king knew that. Camilla knew it too. Anne refused the one thing that might have made the story easier to contain. She would not issue a personal apology. She agreed only that the dignity of the household should be preserved, a phrase recorded in a private aide's account as final. Dignity, in royal terms, meant keeping personal pain from weakening public duty. Anne believed she had done exactly that. Camilla heard the refusal as another wound. Charles heard it as a warning that his sister would help protect the crown, but she would not pretend the queen had been right. The divide widened over dinner. A private meal was shortened without explanation, and one empty chair said more than any announcement could. Camilla felt the absence like judgment. Charles saw the empty place and understood that peace had become performance. Anne stayed away, not out of fear, but because her presence would have turned silence into another confrontation. The palace had managed witnesses, shifted schedules, and softened language, but nothing had healed. The fallout had bruised everyone, but the turning point waited in a smaller room, where Charles and Anne finally met alone, without Camilla, without aides, and without the protection of palace language. When Charles and Anne finally met alone, the drama lost its audience and became more painful. There were no staff members, no formal phrasing, no polished restraint for public consumption. Charles entered carrying anger, embarrassment, and exhaustion. Anne stood by the window, not triumphant, not cold, but deeply saddened that her brother had allowed private insecurity to become public disorder. Charles closed the door behind him and felt the weight of what Windsor had become. The private meeting mattered because it was the first real conversation after the household had begun containment, meaning the quiet effort to limit damage, control talk, and stop a family argument from becoming a palace crisis. The king wanted Anne to admit Camilla had been humiliated. He wanted his sister to see the pain beneath the queen's anger. But Anne wanted him to face something harder. Authority cannot be forced through emotional pressure, even when the person demanding it feels wounded. Anne watched Charles lower himself into a chair, and the silence between them said what pride could not. He admitted, in a strained voice, that the staff had seen him at his weakest. That mattered because a monarch's command depends not only on rank, but on self-control, and his anger had made private loyalty look unstable. Anne did not use that confession against him. She told him she had never wanted to win against him. She had only wanted to keep the institution steady when feelings became dangerous. Charles placed his signet ring hand flat on the table, and the gesture carried more force than shouting ever had. A signet ring, a personal ring often used as a symbol of family identity and authority, became the quiet mark of decision in that moment. He said the words that changed the crisis. Camilla would not be given expanded private decision authority. The queen would remain honored, protected, and central beside him, but the private machinery of Windsor would not bend simply because she had demanded entry through confrontation. Anne did not smile when she heard it. She simply nodded, because she understood the cost. Camilla would feel wounded again. Charles would have to carry that wound back to his wife. Yet the line had to be restored before the monarchy confused affection with command. The king had not rejected the queen. He had rejected the method that brought everyone to breaking point. Anne saw the difference, and he finally seemed to see it too. Charles had regained control in private, but outside Windsor, one public image would soon turn a family rupture into a national spectacle. By morning, the monarchy's private fracture had become public theater. The story moved from corridor whispers to breakfast tables, phone screens, and television panels. What stunned the public was not merely that Camilla had confronted Anne, but that Charles had lost control in front of staff. The king, the queen, and the princess royal had become symbols in a battle over dignity, restraint, and trust. Camilla watched the first reports in silence, her expression fixed, her hurt buried beneath royal stillness. The monarchy, meaning the system where the royal family represents national continuity through duty and ceremony, depends on calm, because calm makes power feel stable. That was why the palace response mattered so much. Its careful message spoke of unity and service, but the absence of direct denial made every word feel heavier. The queen heard the softness and understood the danger. The palace had not defended her version. It had protected the institution first. Charles saw the headline and went still. One morning, newspaper carried Windsor Castle under a storm-gray sky with the words, "The day the king raised his voice," and the sentence struck him harder than any private rebuke. The king knew the public was not only judging a family argument, they were judging whether he could hold loyalty and authority together when the people closest to him pulled in opposite directions. Camilla had demanded recognition. Anne had defended discipline. He had become the breaking point between them. Anne did not celebrate the coverage, and that restraint made the reaction more painful for Camilla. The Princess Royal, the title given to the monarch's eldest daughter as a senior mark of duty, had become the public image of control without ever asking for sympathy. The Queen felt that deeply. She watched commentators praise Anne's composure, and each word sounded like another reminder that dignity had chosen a side. Camilla had wanted the world to see her pain. Instead, the world saw Anne's restraint. Outside Windsor's Henry VIII Gate, a named public entrance to the castle where visitors and press often gather, a small crowd formed as broadcasters framed the story as a test of modern royal character. One presenter called it a clash between emotional demand and old-fashioned duty, and the phrase traveled fast. Charles heard the framing and knew it would last. Anne heard it and stayed quiet. Camilla heard it and understood the wound had moved beyond the corridor. The noise would fade, but the meaning would not. Public reaction could only judge the surface, yet beneath it, each person had already lost something. Camilla had lost the certainty that position guaranteed influence. Charles had lost the illusion that anger could restore command. Anne had lost the comfort of staying outside open conflict. When the noise faded, the real verdict was not written by newspapers or palace statements, but by the changed faces of Charles, Camilla, and Anne. In the end, the confrontation did not destroy the monarchy, but it stripped away an illusion. It revealed that crowns do not silence insecurity, marriage does not erase rivalry, and family loyalty can become the sharpest weapon inside palace walls. Charles lost control for one unforgettable moment, yet the aftermath forced him to choose what kind of authority he truly wanted to defend. Charles understood the final consequence before anyone dared to say it plainly. Camilla's demand for expanded private influence had been halted, and Anne's place as his trusted internal counterweight remained intact. That mattered because private decision-making, meaning the quiet choices about access, advice, duties, and household direction, shapes how power truly moves behind palace doors. The king could honor the queen beside him, but he could not let anger rewrite the structure around him. Anne had not seized authority. She had protected the boundary that Camilla had tried to cross. Camilla felt the loss in a way no public statement could soften. She remained queen, but she now understood that recognition could not be forced from Anne or demanded from a room already loyal to restraint. The queen consort carried the pain of knowing her position had not been enough to win the influence she wanted. Charles saw that pain, and it hurt him. Yet he also saw the danger of giving way simply because the wound was personal. The monarchy could not survive if private hurt became public command. Anne's victory was quiet because she never treated it as victory. In a final private exchange recorded later in a fictional household account, she told Charles that the crown survives only when the people closest to it are brave enough to say no. The crown, meaning the monarchy's authority, duty, and public trust combined, had been tested not by outsiders, but by the people inside its safest rooms. Anne had defended restraint. Charles had finally listened. Camilla had exposed the wound no one wanted to name. Charles accepted the truth with one small gesture. He closed the file on his desk and left it unsigned, confirming that the confrontation had changed policy as well as emotion. The king ended the crisis altered, aware that control is not proven through anger, but through the strength to stop emotion from ruling judgment. Camilla had lost the battle for expanded influence. Anne had held the line. Charles had learned that monarchy survives not when power is seized, but when restraint is finally restored. This was the moment Windsor stopped, pretending control meant silence, and proved that the strongest voice in the room is sometimes the one calm enough not to break. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.